The Madman! Happy Hollow's End every day. Damn it. Happy Hollow's End, everybody. Did I just say everybody? Happy Hollow's End, everyone. And of course, since I have signed on while in a costume, I have earned the free arena ticket. So make sure to dress up as a costume before logging into Hearthstone. Nice little bit of freebie packs. Alright, so what I've come to the conclusion on, Rogue just, man, what can I say? It didn't work out for whatever reason. So you're gonna have to stick with the mage. And by the way, even though this is the final day, as this is played on Halloween, October 31st, last to climb ladder, and I'm probably not gonna make legend, that does not mean that free to play doesn't work. It just means that I happened to go for a very ambitious class and it didn't work out. I'll probably at the end show like 3 decks that definitely would work. I don't think Warrior would have been worse than Mage, because the Warrior Dead Man's Hand deck would have a favorable matchup against Druid. It would be better against Priest, and Kelseth Rogue would be a tough matchup, but not as bad as this one, I think. Well, not entirely sure. It's iffy. So, playing that Rogue deck for a bit gave me some admiration for 2 of the key cards of this deck, I guess, of Fireball and Flame Strike. And Glyph too, I suppose. And Mana Worm's pretty good. I'm not actually sure it's right to kill the 1-1 after thinking about it. It's just the 1-2 into 1-1 seems so perfect. But maybe I missed 1 damage. No, it's kind of worth it, because if he has 2 damage to everything, then he can kill the Crawler. So I protect Crawler, I guess would be the theory behind the play. Of skipping 1 damage. Every damage is worth considering. Alright, so Polymorph is dealing 7 damage. That's pretty worth. And then probably facing with the rest. The 1-1s are not worth dealing with. I know the place. Really close to being able to have the burn to finish. You would have played Doomsayer with Frost Nova if you had it, so... Dang, we're actually 1 damage off, which is why that 1 damage actually mattered. The Firefly I sent it the 1-1. It mattered. We can set him at threatening lethal each turn with the Fire Blast, which is pretty good. So I guess here's the benefit of running Mage. You actually get Fireball. I'm not sure I could have done this as Rogue. I felt like Rogue was the more aggressive class, but I must have been thinking of, like, patches. So I've got enough burn to finish. I mean, this is probably the most useful. Not entirely sure what it's for yet, but... Womp womp mage. When I really think about it though, It's kind of impossible to hit Legend, isn't it? I mean, with time, sure, but given that I only have... How much time do I have here? We can do some number crunching while we're playing this game. So I have 4 hours. Until dinner. Nice hand, actually. I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons later tonight, afterwards, but I could come back after. And since I'm Central Time, I'll have 3 hours. So if I put all 7 hours together, I have, at rank 5, 2-star, we need to win 24 games. Right? 24 games. How long does 24 games even take? We can take a look at the average game length. I have that statistic, thanks to Hearthstone Deck Tracker. My average time with this deck is 8.7 minutes. We'll round that to 9 minutes. So in the most optimistic world, and boy is this optimistic, where I win 24 games straight, it would take 216 minutes. So that would mean in theory it's possible, but let's go with the 60% win rate. So if I need to win 24 games, I only win 60% of the time. That means I need divided by points. No, not even that. Wait, this math actually gets a little bit more tough now. The math, man. So I need 24 total wins over losses. So we need to calculate for X, where...
Mind if I roll need?
Oh no. I haven't done algebra in forever. How do I set up the equation? 0.6x. No. If only I had paper. It's also hard to do while playing a game. That's my excuse. Alright, apparently the people on Twitch have calculated it for me. 78 wins, 54 losses is about how much I'd need. That's at the 60% win rate. So that looks to me like about 130 games. I knew that at rank 5 it was at the halfway point, so it's bad to be on the halfway point on the final day of the ladder. I think I need to go for the long game of Servant of Kalamos. I have the Frostless Jane to help with the long game. 1 health should be fine.
Embrace the void.
Next turn's Jaina. Where was I? 1,040 minutes. That would take about 17 hours. But I only have 7 hours. So it seems like we're going to have to call this free-to-play run. We hit rank 5, like, at the first... Let me go back and see when I did, but I know I hit it pretty high, pretty early, with like a 70% win rate. But boy, does it get much harder at this level somehow. Rank 5 and above. Okay, apparently it's 120 games and not 130, but that's not really going to change the calculations that much. 10 fewer games is... Ooh. Oh, ruined! I do think this deck has a win rate very close to 50% at rank 5 to Legend, which is why it takes so long to climb the Legend. Also a reminder that I did attend TwitchCon for a week, for like about 10 days, really, so that took a lot of the time that I would normally have for a free-to-play run. I mean, this is now the excuse episode. But it's not really excuses as much as it is. This deck could hit Legend with a lot of time dedicated to it, but I don't think it's very realistic to. And at Legend rank, it would, at High Legend, it would certainly have an under 50% win rate. It's just not that powerful of a deck against the meta. However, there are, to help you guys thinking, oh no, free to play can't be done. I'm certain that with 4 of the classes, I could have made Legend. 4 of the Death Knights if I had opened those. And the 5th one, questionable, but I think we could have done it too. 5th one would be Warrior. And I'll build decks to show what those would look like afterwards. So I want to try to avoid overcommitting into Dragonfire. So on this turn, I'd probably just play Flame Elemental. I definitely want to draw. A decent amount of burn, 6, 9, 12, 13. I wonder if I should have actually touched my own guy just to play around Dragonfire. Maybe. Woof. Boy, that Frosted Chain is gonna buy him a lot of time. 4 cards left. I wonder if it's possible that that deck can't fit Valen in though. Well, he just killed a bunch of his own guys, so that might not have been ideal. We certainly have to go all out.
I'm almost out of cards. Shadowy thoughts.
Yeah. Is that interesting? I wasn't actually... I didn't know that the water elementals, the elementals kept lifesteal, including the recently played ones, but I guess that makes sense. A little bit of trivia. P.S. he runs Valen. So, one of the reasons why this particular deck doesn't work out is because the Priest deck is just a stronger control deck right now. It keeps control really well, and then it has like a more secure way to win the end game. It's like the ultimate control deck. And then the other ultimate control deck in the other direction is Jade. So this kind of half-hearted control deck. Elementals used to be the like valuable enough to use, but just not anymore. So I guess the same goes for Mage and Rogue. We made a good run for it, and we hit rank 5 pretty fast with it, but I think for this meta, this is the limit for the deck. So, free-to-play run, we salute you. I didn't know at the beginning of the month whether or not I'd be able to make it. This was one of the ones I was like, yeah. And also, I chose like a pretty tough Death Knight to make it at. Let's take a look at what would have been easier to do. I've done a lot of thought about free-to-play decks in the current Knights of the Frozen Throne KFC meta. I was like, well, what if I had gotten the other Death Knights? Would I have fared better? Would I have fared worse? What would I have done? And I actually just went ahead and constructed a bunch of free-to-play decks, and I figured that I might as well share them with all of you while I had them. So, kind of going from easy to very hard difficulty. Easy meaning I'm nearly 100% sure that I could hit Legend with these decks. Medium being like, I'm pretty sure I could hit Legend with the decks. Hard being, I'm not entirely sure. And very hard being like, that's pretty iffy. So this assumes that you actually have the mechanics to play the deck. It doesn't have anything to do with the dust cost of it, how hard it is to obtain the cards. Starting with Jade Druid, a very famously good deck. It's actually pretty inexpensive, especially with this variant, which has a bit of early game as well, and a bit more defense. With Mind Control attacks and Galactic Crawlers, this is teched towards a specific KFC meta. Turns out Malfurion is really good in the deck, Ultimate Infestation is really good, Spreading Plague is still really good even at 6. This deck does require one legendary, Aya Black Ball, which is really good in this deck, as well as Evolved Shaman, so it's just a good craft in general. Fandral has been left out even though it's a very good card, but it's not really enough to alter the deck. You know the game plan of this deck. Survive until you get to 10 mana and then cast the Ultimate Infestation and win the game. Some Jades will be summoned along the way, so you just make some big guys and you make some bigger guys. Token Druid is a top tier deck right now, and I've actually just taken this list straight from the top decks. I've decided not to cut the cost of patches here, but I have put some thought into what you would replace patches in the Pirate package with if you had to, due to costs. And you'd cut the 2 Bloodsail Corsair and the patches and the South Sea Captain, and you would put in 2 Argent Squire and I think a Crazed Alchemist and a Vicious Fledgling. It's got a very simple game plan of developing a bunch of stuff early. Even Snowflipper Penguin gets to fit in because Mark of the Lotus and Mark of Yasharaj and Power of the Wild all go extremely well with the very cute card. I can't believe this guy managed to make it into a tier 1 deck. Incredible. The deck you know and love, puts on pressure early, puts on pressure middle, and then kills you before it gets delayed, otherwise you'll lose. Next up, we've got a very budget version of Evolved Shaman, running under 2,000 dust, assuming that you've opened Thrall Deathseer. And if you want to cut Thrall Deathseer, be my guest, just put a Jade Spirit if you don't have the Thrall Deathseer. Deck plan is the same as general Evolved Shaman. You get out your Doppelgangster, you play Evolve, and then you get 3 6-drops as the big win condition, but also you just put out a bunch of tokens and you Bloodlust. Pretty simple game plan. I think that this is only medium difficulty if you're using this version of the budget deck, but you add in the patches, you add in the 2 Corsairs, you add in Aya, and then you've got a easy run to Legend, I'd say. Though that does ramp up the cost by a good 3,200 plus. If you were curious about what you cut for patches, Aya, and 2 Corsair, it's 2 Argent Squire, Jade Spirit, and one of the Stonehill Defenders. Next up, we've got 2 versions of Warlock that should work for getting you to Legend free to play. This version of Zoo doesn't run the Death Knight, and it's under 2,000 dust. The reason why it doesn't run the Death Knight is because Malkazar's Imp is in Karazhan. So without Malkazar's Imp, I don't really want to run Soulfire or Doomguard, so I've decided not to run the Death Knight. So we've got a very old school version, which just runs a bunch of good 1-drops, puts on the pressure, then puts on very efficient 2-drops and 3-drops and 4-drops to kind of bring home the point of Zoo. You want to have minions on the board for your Defender of Argus, for your Cobalt Scalebane, and for your Bone Mirror, and for your Sea Giant. So it gets ahead early and then stays ahead by putting in really big threats afterwards. This one's medium just because I'm not entirely sure how good this deck is, but I'm near certain that I could hit Legend with even this deck. But of course, if you run my version of Zoo that I ran so much before I began the free-to-play run, then that's an easy run to Legend, I would say. You would need to add in Kel'Seth and the patches, which brings up the cost of this deck to about 5,500. If you open the Death Knight for Warlock and you're looking for a way to use him, I think this is a pretty interesting way to hit Legend with a pretty inexpensive deck. So you have Blood Reaver Gul'dan. It's used for the purposes of resurrecting Abyssal Enforcer, Despicable Dreadlord, and Voidwalker in a classic Control Warlock deck, though with a slightly different twist to it. Now, I consider this a hard way to get to Legend because I'm not entirely sure how strong Control Warlock is in the meta, but I have chosen the version that seems like it would do the best to crush Jade Druid as well as Raza Priest, because it has some early game giants and some drakes, and then you can copy those giants and drakes with Faceless Shambler. The current versions of Control Warlock do run big threats as well, such as the Lich King, but I've kept the cost of this deck low. It survives early with cards like Mistress of Mixtures and Drained Soul and Earthen Ring Farseer, and runs very efficient board clears such as Defile with Tainted Zealot, very tricky to use but very satisfying to clear the board with. And then you Hellfire and Abyssal Enforcer in the late game. Against control decks you can play out these huge threats early. The Hunter deck has always been touted as a nice budget deck, and this is no different. The only big thing that's missing here is from Karazhan, the Kindly Grandmother has been cut because to keep the cost down. Taking the spot of Kindly Grandmother is Scavenging Hyena, though you find Scavenging Hyena in these decks all the time also. Deathstalker Rexar, this is assumed that you get the Deathstalker Rexar. If you don't get the Deathstalker Rexar, then just cut it for a Spellbreaker or some such thing, or a Tracking. Pretty straightforward plan, curve out, and then in the late game you kill them with your Steady Shot and your Kill Command, but it plays like a tempo deck. You play on curve, you play some really big threats for the cost, and you beat the opponent's face in eventually. The only reason why I put this at a medium difficulty is because Tempo Rogue is pretty strong right now, and I consider it a stronger deck than this deck. You run into a lot of Tempo Rogue, you could be in for a bad time. But hey, the Galactic Crawler isn't there. If you were to open a Scourgelord Garrosh, I have a really interesting free-to-play challenge for you. First of all, how you're gonna get 5,000 dust. It's probably not a 1 month thing, but over 2 months, let's say. And I've kept the dust count low on this one, but you do need every single epic. And then the hard part is, can you actually hit Legend with this monstrosity? If I were to pilot this deck, I would consider hitting Legend to be easier than the Mage that I did, because it has a more favorable matchup against Priest, it has a more favorable matchup against Druid, it has a more favorable matchup against Rogue. It can take on aggro. I actually think I could hit Legend with this deck, but I can't really say for certain. There's a reason why this deck isn't very popular. It's very tough to play, but it's very satisfying. You try to fatigue them with Dead Man's Hand. You shuffle a Dead Man's Hand into your deck. You draw them out with Cold Light Oracle. You shuffle another Cold Light Oracle into your deck each time also. You stay alive with the tools provided to you. It's difficult on a number of levels, and it is still losing to Tempo Rogue. And it's not even that good against Raza Priest. And it takes a lot of finesse to play, but boy is it satisfying. And finally, we have the deck that I took. I consider it very hard to hit Legend with this deck, because of the meta, really. So this is a control deck which sadly does not beat the Tempo Rogue, and it gets out-controlled by the Raza Priest and the Jade Druid. For this reason, it would probably take a lot of time to hit Legend with this deck, and yet I still consider this to be near the optimal version of the build. It's just this top of a very small hill, I would say, is the thing. As I glanced out into the mountains of Jade Druid and Raza Priest and Tempo Rogue, I was like, boy, this deck loses to all of them as well as a bunch of tier 2 decks. Basically, it's outclassed is a good definition of this deck. But it got me to rank 5 extremely fast. So all in all, when you're starting out in this game, these are the decks that I would kind of encourage you to go to, especially if you opened a relevant Death Knight for these specific classes. And it becomes kind of clear that Patches is really good against across a lot of decks, and is probably a very top priority to craft if you're an aggressive player or a tempo-based player. And then Aya is a really good craft if you want to go for a little bit more of a mid-range or late game play. And there's a few control decks in here too, for those who like to go that route, and even a combo deck with the Dead Man's Hand. So I consider 2,000 dust a very reachable number on 1 month, and therefore I would consider like 5,000 dust a very reachable number on 2 months. For reference, I managed to craft basically this entire deck halfway through the free-to-play run of 1 month. And most of the gold that you get is through the quests anyways. Now I get the question a lot of the time of, what if you had opened a Paladin Death Knight, which I did, or a Rogue Death Knight, or a Priest Death Knight? Could I craft a free-to-play deck with those? Here's the breakdown. The Uther Death Knight has much the same problem as the Jaina Death Knight, except even more. It gets outclassed by the other control decks. And Jaina is a pretty outclassing Death Knight already, but Uther just doesn't do enough because you're summoning a 2/2 instead of a 3/6 with lifesteal. Valera is much the same problem. Valera duplicates cards, but boy is that an expensive deck to craft. Oh, and by the way, the Uther deck can be crafted and probably could hit legends. I'm not even sure if it could, if you put in a bunch of legendaries into it. But even then, I think it's a weak tier 4 deck. The Rogue deck, you could probably hit legend with a dedicated Valera Miracle deck as well, but boy would that be tough. And then finally, Priest, yes, that is a tier 1 deck, but it is very expensive right now because you definitely need Shadow Reaper Anduin, and you need Raza, and you need Kazakis, and you need a bunch of 1-drops, a bunch of 1-ups. The problem of a Dragon Priest, which is great, is it needs Netherspite Historian from Karazhan. And the problem with a Silence Priest, which is great, is you need Purify from Karazhan. And that adventure, to get just one of the cards you need, which is very critical, does cost a decent amount. But those are good cards as well, and good decks. If you have Karazhan unlocked, would recommend. Now I should also take the opportunity to mention to you that these difficulties are assuming that you're going for legend rank. Hitting just rank 5 not only puts you in the top 2 percentile of players, but also at the end of the season, when you have your rank 5 chest, you're getting a dust value of over 500 dust. And that's a big jump over rank 6, which only gets 225 dust. So if you don't hit legend in your first month of this free-to-play challenge, which by the way, that's a very impressive task indeed, then you're getting another 500 dust to carry over for the next month, and then you hit legend that month. You go. So that's my breakdown of a bunch of free-to-play decks, and I do encourage you to go down this path if you're starting out, or if you want to go down the road of humility.